Okay, so we're going to start the second part of the symposium, which will be for us to reflect and remember our great patron, Neil Pappalardo. So you'll be hearing from several of us. I'm just going to give a brief overview to start. We're very fortunate in this department to have a number of strong friends and supporters who have helped us over the years, but Neil just stood alone in terms of the enormous transformative impact that he's had over the decades in this department, both in terms of its breadth and its depth. It's just, it's really unbelievable. That's both been on in terms of the research that his help enabled, but I think almost more importantly on the community that it's helped us build. MIT Physics is a really big department. It's the biggest department in the School of Science. It's over 80 faculty, if you count the faculty who are jointly appointed in other departments, 100 postdocs, 300 PhD students, 200 majors, split over half a dozen buildings across campus. It would be very easy for us to be, really disconnected and sprawling and not feel like one entity. And I was an undergrad here in the last century, in the 1980s, and I know as an undergrad you have a sort of myopic view, but I'll definitely tell you that at that time my sense was of one of a bunch of individual fiefdoms and not one big place. And it even felt that way when I, to a lesser degree, but still when I joined the faculty in 1999. And I think that's really not true now, and so much of why that's not true, I can trace back to things I can just point to, and we're going to be hearing about in the next few minutes, of things that Neil did or urged us to do or helped us do or made it possible to do. And I can't think of another single person who had that much of a transformative impact on what makes our department so special today. And that's why we're so grateful for it. Some of the things are really big, and you'll be hearing about it from some of the other speakers. I mean, the single most impactful thing I think has been the Pappalardo's Fellows Program, which we're celebrating here today, which in just this amazing panoply of ways just knits together the department, starting from the way the fellows are selected, the way that's a very broad group. Well, we pull in nominations from all over, a very broad range of physics. The whole department gets involved in doing the evaluation. The people visit, but then once the fellows are here, they connect the department together. The Pappalardo Fellows lunches that we have is an opportunity to bring everyone together. It's just this really important knitting together that there's nothing like it. And I have to say, I hadn't appreciated until I became department head how much impact it's had outside of MIT. Also, other departments at MIT, department heads are constantly coming to me saying, "Oh, we're thinking of trying to form a postdoctoral program. How did you do that? Why is the Pappalardo? Why does that work so well?" I get this when I visit other universities. Everybody knows about this program and the impact it's had. And it started just internally, and now it just everywhere is the impact it's had for us is really recognized, and we'll hear more about that. The space we're in right now. So Neil made it possible for the Green Center renovation to happen, and Marc will tell us some about that. But this room, I mean, is an amazing crucible of connecting people together. So this might be apocryphal. So I was hired in 1999 by Marc Kastner, thank you, and he was a relatively new department head at the time, which is, I guess, why he hired me, because he didn't know better. And so one of the things that Marc did that really helped knit things together for the faculty also is started this faculty lunch thing. And I seem to remember either Marc or Neil or both of you telling me that Neil had said to Marc, make sure you have good food. It's about the gathering. I mean, the talk, and it's, there are a zillion different talks all through the week. There are too many. We can't go to them all. Yes, it's nice to hear what our colleagues are working on, but it's much nicer to sit with them before the talk and chat over good food. As graduate students, there's this idea that, you put food out, the graduate students will come, and that's true. Well, and faculty still retain that to a degree, but if you're good, it's harder. So it's a small thing, and you can talk about things like food and social events and things, but it's so important in building community, and it's something that Neil really understood and helped us understand. And the way the Fellows Program is set up is so much about community building. Just that small thing about the advice on lunch, which has been transformative, and there would have been a faculty lunch today, except we were all in here. So the fact that they're all here, they just didn't get a lunch, and they still came. And so that's been incredible. Another thing I'll say about the department, when I joined in 1999, if you in most of the areas, so what's incredible about, a neat thing about this department is that we do all sorts of different physics. And in nearly every area in 1999, you could say, who are the top 5 places in the country that do X, the condensed matter physics or AMO physics or theoretical physics or whatever, and MIT would be in there, quite possibly fighting for the top 2 or 3 spots. And there was one area that wasn't true, which was my area, by the way, which is astrophysics, which is where we had fantastic astrophysicists here, but as a group, it was not competitive at that level nationally. It was something we were aspiring to, but had not yet gotten there yet. And it's Neil who actually did one of the key things that helped us get on the path to where we are now, where we are a really strong astrophysics program, as well as in all the other areas of physics. And that was making it possible for us to get into the Magellan telescopes. And Rob will tell us more about that. But that's just is an example of something that's completely changed that entire side of research, and one that's been, that's been a great credit to the institute, to the department rather. And so then the last thing I want to comment on is and this might be less familiar to some people in the room, is how involved Neil was in governance of MIT. Of course, he was a life member of the corporation, which is the governing board of MIT, and as such, he sat on the physics visiting committee, which is, it's MIT's secret sauce for how its departments are so strong. Is this external group that comes in. A lot of universities have that, and what most places do is they get people from that field from other universities come and kind of critique what's going on, and that's part of the visiting committee process here. But a super important part is that members of the corporation sit on the visiting committee too, which means that actually people read the report and it has impact, because when it's done, it's the people on the corporation, they were there, they heard the stuff, they tell their colleagues about it. It doesn't get swept under the rug. And so if there's a problem in the department, everyone knows about it. It's very visible, including to senior leadership. But if the department needs help about something, it's not so easy to ignore the visiting committee recommendations. And Neil was incredibly helpful to us in helping become stronger through that process. Not just because, all the corporation members sitting on the committees take that role very seriously, but for most of them, they pay attention for those, those 2 days that happen once every 2 years, and then you don't see them again until 2 years later. Neil didn't disappear. He was there afterwards, following up, saying, "Hey, these things are raised. What are you doing? How can I help? What have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? How come this is still a problem? That was a problem 2 years ago." And he'd be in there, really wanting to make sure that we succeeded in doing everything he could to help us, in a way that's has just been phenomenal. So the last thing I want to say is, I think people are aware of some of the big things that Neil has done to help us, getting us into Magellan, endowing the Fellows Program, telling Marc to have good food at the lunch. But another important thing that he did, and I didn't learn about this until I became department head, is he was he was a great source of advice to the department head. So we have, Marc is here, Ed is here, Peter Fisher is here, I'm here. As soon as I became department head, he called me up and said, come to my place for breakfast. I want to talk to you. I was like, okay, wait. I couldn't have done anything wrong yet. I just started, right? So what's the matter? But and he came and he just sat down. He's like, let's talk about what are you thinking about? What are you worried about? What here are some things that I know. It was incredibly supportive. A thing that Neil did every year, as far as I know, was he made an understood to give to the department at the discretion of the department head to enable us just to react quickly to things that were arising. A lot of things that we're trying to do, junior faculty startup or renovations or things like that, they're expensive. The department has to pay usually half of it. We get help. We try and get help from the dean and the provost to. Dean, thank you for being helpful to us as often as you are. But that takes a lot of negotiation. It sometimes takes a long time to work out the details. And sometimes opportunities are fleeting. And having some discretionary resources where you can just act right away, knowing that you're going to get help from the dean and the provost later, but right now we have our own resources that we can do something quickly, that's made the difference so often. And Neil understood that. That's one of the things he explained to me. He's like, look, this is to help you move quickly when you need to. Understanding that and helping a new department head understand that, it was just an incredible privilege to be able to have such thoughtful and generous help. So I just can't imagine what this department would be like without all the changes that Neil's made possible for us. And we'll never forget them. So I'm going to pass it over to Marc Kastner now.
Well, that was a great overview. I wanted to tell you a couple of experiences I had with Neil, which I think say how I remember him and always will remember him. There are two stories, and they both begin in 1998 when I became department head. Shortly after, I found out that MIT had received a gift from Cecil and Ida Green, for renovation of the department. And for reasons I don't want to get into, the gift was languishing and nothing was happening. So I had this idea that we would renovate space in this building and primarily this building, building 4 and 8, and give up our space on the first floor of building 6 and trade that space with the material science department, which was living over here. And I went to the dean, and he went to the provost, and the provost said, the current head of the material science department is impossible. You won't be able to negotiate with him. I'm getting a new department head in a year or two, so wait until the new department head is in place. So I waited for that, and then the new department came in, and he agreed this would be a good idea, and we began a long series of planning. We brought in architects and had great ideas. They thought we should build a building in the courtyard, all kinds of great ideas. We were at the stage where the provost just had to say, go ahead and start. And 2 weeks or a week or two before a visiting committee meeting, I was called into the dean's office and told that this was cut off because MIT had been building too much building. And I think Neil was one of the people on the executive committee at that time that thought too much had been done. There was too much borrowing. We had all these wonderful new buildings, but couldn't pay for them. So I went into this visiting committee, and now we're talking about, 2004. So it's, 6 years later. And I went in, and I was just fit to be tied. And I made this plea that, you couldn't treat the great physics department like this. And the next thing I knew, Neil offered $5 million if we matched it. And that would, together with the gift from Cecil Green, would make it possible to overcome the barrier that there was not enough money. And the provost agreed, and the Green Center was still called the Green Center, and it was built. Neil didn't really, he told us, we offered to put his name on this room, and he said, don't bother. And we said, we've got to have the Pappalardo name at the heart of the department because he did so much to make this happen. So the building was completed in 2007. So it was nearly a decade to make this happen, but it never would have happened without Neil. I was enormously grateful, although when he made this offer, I was terrified because we had never raised anything near $5 million. But with the help of Elizabeth Chadis and lots of friends, we succeeded, and that taught me for the first time that we really could raise a lot more money than we thought. But the gift from Neil really gave us the incentive and the leverage to do that. It was really important. So let's go back to 1998. I had just become department head in July. And I think in less than a month, this guy shows up in my office unannounced, bald but a ponytail. And he comes in and he asks my administrative assistant to get him a parking sticker. And we didn't know who he was. And he said, and she said, where are you parked? And he said, I'm parked next to the Pappalardo Labs. That's all he said, right? Suddenly we figured out who this guy was. We really didn't know. And he sat down at a table in my office, and I thought once I knew who he was, I thought he would ask me about the department and my research, what vision I had for the department. Not at all. All he wanted to know was about my family. What kids did I have? How old were they? How were they doing? And I don't think we talked about anything else except family, and then he went off, right? And that really reveals Neil's values, and I saw that over and over again. In September of that year, so just a couple of months later, we had our annual Physics Fall reception at Endicott House, and we invited Neil, and he came. And he pulled me aside at this reception, and he said, you know, I want to do something big for the physics department, but not a building. So he said, go ahead and ask the department what they really want and think about it. So I started thinking about it, and for many years, Bob Bergeron and I had talked about how jealous we were of Harvard, which had the Junior Fellows program. This is a program that spans all of Harvard, so that people from every possible field, and they come in after the PhD, and they get to do what they want. And often there are some very famous physicists who started their careers there. And we were really jealous of this. So Bob, who was dean, and I went to Neil. He invited us down to Blue Hill, and we said to him, Neil, you know, this is really what we want. We want a distinguished postdoctoral fellows program. And I don't know if these were his exact words, but what I remember him saying is, what's a postdoc? He really didn't know. And it's ironic because within a few years, he became the primary advocate for postdocs on the corporation, on the executive committee. He's the one who asked that all the visiting committees inquire about postdocs in the departments. Before that, no one had paid any attention to them. So we explained what this was, what a postdoc was. But after a while, he said, you know, I'm not convinced this is what you really want. Go back and ask the Physics Council again. So I called another meeting of the Physics Council, and I think I see some members at the time were here, and everybody said, of course, this is a great idea. Now, Bob and I had proposed something like the Harvard Junior Fellows, but spanning the School of Science. So we were asking Neil to help with fellows across the School of Science. So we came back and we said, and we convinced Neil that this was what we really wanted. But we had asked him to endow it, and he did several things which were really critical in how successful the program has been. The first is he said, I'm never going to endow it. I'll support it on a yearly basis. We'll review it in 5 years, but I'm not endowing things. If I endow it, it'll take 10 years for you to have enough money to start the program. But if I pay for it on a yearly basis, we can start right away. So that was really important. And the second thing is he said, I'll take care of physics. You, Bergeneau, take care of the rest of the school. We are so lucky he did that. Because, of course, the rest of the school doesn't have fellows. But more important, because it was physics, the fellows became part of our community. They come to our Thursday lunches as well as the Wednesday lunches. Food is a big thing, you heard. And so the second meeting at Blue Hill really kicked things off. A couple of weeks later, Neil shows up again unannounced in my office, and he says, do you have a pen? And I gave him a pen. I didn't know what this. He wrote me a check for $500,000. I have never seen this check for $500,000 that before or since. Neil really knew how to make an impact. One thing I never expected, and I think has been absolutely essential to the Pappalardo's Fellow Program, is that Neil and Jane really adopted the fellows. They really became a kind of extended family. They invited them to their homes in the Christmas and in their summer home. And, you know, they really, the fellows warmed to them and they to the fellows. And this has been enormously gratifying to me. I was actually stunned and thrilled when Neil and Jane decided to endow this program, because it, as you know, as Bob Bergeneau has said to me many times, this is the foremost fellowship program, postdoctoral fellowship program in physics in the world. It's just no question about it. And now it will last in perpetuity, and I think those of us who got to know Neil are extremely lucky. It was one of the thrills of my life that I got to know him so well. And I will remember him with great affection always. And the Pappalardo's Fellows Program will be a legacy that will live forever. Thank you.
So next we'll hear from Rob Simcoe.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and welcome. I have some remarks written down here because there are specific things I want to say. So being an astrophysicist at MIT is an eccentric and very rewarding job. It's one I'm grateful to have, like all my colleagues. But it takes really hard work and a couple of lucky breaks along the way. And I'm sure each of us in this room has a person or two that we can point to and say, if it weren't for them taking a chance, my life would have been very different. And Neil Pappalardo has a spot on my Mount Rushmore in that kind of way, but maybe for more reasons than you might think. So the most obvious reason is that, like today's earlier speakers, I came to MIT as a Pappalardo Fellow. I haven't left in 25 years. So I was in one of the earliest classes when actually nobody in astronomy had heard of this fellowship, and MIT was not a top-tier player in optical astronomy. And I was just barely a card-carrying astronomer. I had no physics degree, and I was arriving for a chalkboard interview at one of the world's most prestigious physics departments, seeking a fellowship whose name many of my colleagues struggled to pronounce correctly. Actually, that interview was terrifying. That's a whole separate story. But the reason I came to MIT was actually not the Pappalardo Fellowship. It took some time, actually, for the program to acquire the prestige that we've heard about and it enjoys today. Astronomers, or at least the ones who observe the real universe, measure the chapters of our lives by telescopes and by the groups of people who come together in a particular academic generation, which lasts sort of like a PhD length, to build experiments or chase a particular phenomenon. And then we disperse and then we reconstitute as new scientific opportunities emerge and people move to different institutions and pursue their careers. It's sort of like remembering houses and apartments that you lived in, actually, if you're familiar with that, and then the neighbors that were around you during those times that you lived there. So I came to MIT to use a new telescope in Chile called Magellan. So I'd previously observed extensively on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. But through a collaborator, I had the opportunity to observe in my last year on an observing run in Magellan's first year of operations, where I witnessed something that was truly astonishing, a telescope that you didn't need to focus. So it had a novel system of actuated optics that used pick-off mirrors and lens-lit arrays to close a control loop, and it kept the telescope performing optimally during science observations. So this is standard procedure nowadays. But the software and algorithms that were developed here at MIT were entirely new to me at the time. And I realized two things from that experience. One, this telescope was going to be highly capable. And second of all, going to MIT would give you a market edge because MIT had a lot of observing time, but most of the community hadn't yet realized that MIT was really seriously getting into the game. What I didn't know at that time was that MIT's entry into the Magellan Consortium was directly enabled by the Pappalardo's philanthropic support that you heard about earlier. Neil loved MIT, and he was a veteran of the visiting committees, where we bring in experts from academia and industry to advise. And Deepto calls it our special sauce. I say it's when they hear about all of our problems. As it was told to me, Neil heard at one of these meetings about MIT's desire to expand from high-energy radio and gravitational wave astrophysics into optical astronomy as a way to broaden the pool of talent that we could attract and retain. So Neil had a genuine curiosity both about what makes the universe tick and about what makes people tick. And I imagine that the sort of combination of those two led him and Jane to make the enabling gift that brought MIT into this consortium. And I want to say just a little bit about actually the science and the people that this brought together. So first, the science. So Neil was not a details guy, but he really loved having a front row seat to whatever was happening on the bleeding edge of scientific inquiry. And what I mean by that is, like, literally he would sit in the front row here during all of these talks and badger the speakers with questions that he researched the day before. I knew that he took this very seriously. They always seemed off the cuff, but I don't think they exactly were. It's only with time and distance that the cumulative impact of a facility like Magellan, or like a postdoctoral program, start to come into focus. So here's a few things that we didn't understand about the universe when Neil and Jane made their gift, but that we understand now, thanks to observations that have been made with this telescope. So we learned that supermassive black holes grew in the centers of the first galaxies, far closer to the Big Bang than we would have expected, including the first important example at redshift 7.5 that was discovered at Magellan. And it's now widely understood that the early emergence of million to billion solar mass black holes was no after effect of galaxy formation, that instead actually black holes formed at the same time as, or possibly before, the actual stars in those galaxies. I think that's something we didn't really appreciate 25 years ago. Magellan also had a role in two of the most influential investigations that demonstrated that the heaviest elements on the periodic table were synthesized in the merger of inspiraling neutron stars. So in one of these, led by Anna Frabel and her graduate student Alex G., we saw stars in a tiny galaxy that was orbiting the Milky Way that were enormously enhanced in europium, which is a strange exotic element that only is manufactured in regions where there's a huge density of neutrons. And because this galaxy only had 1,000 stars, it could only take a single neutron star merger to make all the europium that they needed. So it closed the entire required budget without any other processes necessary. So not long after that, our colleagues at LIGO observed the merger of a binary neutron star directly in gravitational waves. And Magellan actually took a spectrum of the associated optical transient less than an hour after its localization. This is why it's good to be a part of the big telescopes, that you can just change your plans in an hour and observe whatever's the most interesting thing at that moment. So Magellan's rapid discovery of a blue transient, which was followed by red spectral peaks from elements in the lanthanide series, allowed us to follow the formation of those elements as it was happening. So if you take a look at any gold or silver or platinum jewelry, I've got my gold ring, then you know now that because of these observations, we understand that at least half, and actually probably most of the atoms in this ring or anything that you're wearing, originated in the tidal tail of a neutron star that got shredded. And actually, these were the lucky atoms, right? The other ones ended up in the black hole that was created. So these are just a few discoveries. There's more than I can recount today, but I just want to say that beyond just producing great science, it's just a joy to be at Magellan, at the telescopes, enjoying the dark skies, sharp images that the telescopes produce. Neil and Jane know this from making several trips down, starting with the observatory's inauguration in first light. And so sadly, that first trip predated my time at MIT, but I understand that there was an epic party that culminated in the Archbishop of La Serena blessing the telescopes. So I still build instruments for the Magellan telescopes all these years later, and I frequently wish that they had saved a few extra bottles of the holy water for future use. We could use them at times. So access to this remarkable observatory and the science it produces brought together a really interesting group of people, a terrific group in the Astrophysics division in the Kavli Institute. Beyond our own community, also, the Pappalardos established a new prize lecture, the Pappalardo Distinguished Lecture in Physics. It was right around the time of the original Magellan gift. So following Neil's interest, many of these lectures focused on astrophysics. And also by distinguished, I mean that of the 25 lecturers that I counted, 4 have Nobel Prizes. And I think you could make a very significant case for a 5th in that. And over half of them are in the National Academies. So most of the Nobels were actually awarded after individuals delivered their Pappalardo lecture, which means that if you're invited, you have about a 1 in 5 chance. So that's you, Matt. Yes. So there was also an emphasis on science communication with really interesting talks by a young Neil deGrasse Tyson and also Paula Apsell, who produced NOVA for GBH for many years. So over time, this great combination of scientific resources and great people allowed MIT Astrophysics to grow into the kind of place that Neil and the department, I think, had imagined in those early visiting committee deliberations. And the existence of all of us here today, I think, makes self-evident the value of this community as we gather together and tell stories about them. So I've heard it said in some cultures that people who pass away sometimes stay with us as long as their memory remains in the people who knew them while they were alive. And I really like that idea. So I couldn't remember where I first heard this, so I spent some time talking with Claude. So Claude cheerfully suggested that this was the topic of Coco, which is a Pixar movie. This is not exactly what I had in mind, but this idea goes way back further. So it's embedded in Native American traditions, and there was a long list of other cultures that led me to think Claude was making things up. But eventually I found what I thought must have been the first recorded and citable instance of this idea. And it came from, of all people, an Italian, like Neil. A paisano, and I guess Neil would say he's Sicilian, most likely, and not the same thing. But still, for the purposes of today, we'll assume these are equivalent. So this person's name was Cicero, and I thought he wins for brevity. And he said, "Vita enim mortuorum in memoria est posita vivorum," which means the lives of the dead reside in the memory of the living. So here we remember Neil, who had a really big heart. He had an enormous positive impact, not just with his own family, his colleagues, people he was in business with, but also in our department and how we explore the universe together with Magellan, in the lives of many of us gathered here today. So, so Jane, it's an honor to have you and the family here to share all of these thoughts. So thank you.
Peter Fisher.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you to the powers that be for giving me a few minutes to remember Neil, who was, a really towering figure, and a special welcome and condolences to Neil's family. You've all done so much, and it was never a one-man show, especially with Jane involved. These remarks were hard for me to prepare for a variety of reasons. There have been several losses this year, and Neil's certainly the most important of them. But and then there are other difficulties, and that generation seemed indestructible, and it's just little hard. I tried to think of some words that describe Neil, but I didn't realize I'd be standing among three pictures of him. So this is Neil on his best behavior. That you can tell is Neil about to drill into something. And it was genius to put these here. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things. One was the origins, the first days of the Pappalardo Fellowships programs and how it evolved, and then a couple of intersections I had with Neil in faculty governance, which I'll take with me always. I was, a new, relatively new, well, I've been here 32 years, so I'm still new. Faculty member when Marc Kastner asked me to serve on the Pappalardo Fellowship Committee, and I said, I have two questions. What's a fellow and what's a Pappalardo? And we got through that, and the committee was formed and started working, and I remember Mehran Kardar was on it. I remember Jackie Hewitt, and Roman Jakiv was the chair. So in the first meetings, we're starting to talk about how we're organizing things and what we're doing. And Roman, who was just an august, terrifying figure to me, kept saying, well, how do they do the Junior Fellows program at Harvard? How do they select for the Junior Fellows program? And finally, I said, Roman, clam it. This isn't Harvard. We're going to do our own thing, and I just kind of had it with the guy. And I ran into Neil some other time. He asked me how the committee was going, and I said, I relayed this story to him. And I don't remember exactly what Neil said, but I remember the word ossified was used with respect to Harvard. And he was very happy that we were maintaining the spirit of the fellowship program. That first year, we really didn't know what we were doing. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but there were some difficulties, and it kind of ended up with, we didn't get exactly who we wanted, but that first class was terrific. And I remember Neil heard something and came to ask me about, what was going on, and I was trying to be very diplomatic, and he finally said, look, I know you didn't get exactly the people you want. It's okay. We're going to know each other for a long time, so don't bullshit me. And I was like, it was, but it was very human and very authentic moment. So the program got off to a start, and I was, those first couple of years were just really shocked and surprised about how the quality of the people who were applying, even in the very first years, and it was, sobering to me because I was nowhere near that good. I'd never make it into the program. I also, just in full disclosure, I didn't get into MIT either for undergraduate or graduate school, so I was kind of used to feeling. I cycled off the committee, and then some years went by, six or 8 years, and I cycled back onto the committee. And boy, had things changed. And this was because of Carol. Carol runs this thing with military precision. There's reading of folders, there's selection, and then there's inviting people. And I remember Carol standing there in front of us saying, you know, you have 2 days, 8 people a day, 16 people, no more. And, you know, always we invited 18 or 19 or 20. And Carol with gritted teeth would allow this. But it turned into the interview from hell. And I think Rob alluded to this. So what I remember is we're in this room, there are 2 rows of us. There's a blackboard, there's no chalk, I think there was an eraser, and there is the smallest chair you've ever seen at MIT. And so we would invite the candidate in. I'm not sure that we introduced ourselves. We certainly didn't ask them who they were. And the chair of the committee would say, summarize your research for us at the chalkboard. So the person would look around for some chalk and then realize there wasn't any, and they'd start talking, and they'd get interrupted the first sentence, and then the next 20 minutes was just continually interrupting these poor people. And I remember at one point somebody tried to get someone to spin around by asking questions, you know, from the right end. And we still got very good people, but it wasn't the way we did things. And Neil heard about this, and I don't think I was the only one he talked to, but he said, look, you know, you've got to treat people decently. And when I interview people at Meditech, you know, I sit down, I talk to them, I get to know them a little bit. And, you know, this is bearing my name. I don't want you torturing people like this. Again, so it got cleaned up. And I think now it really runs like a clock. And I absolutely emphasize the importance of food and the lunches and of this room. And I was department head for 9 years, and I think I said this during that time. My favorite time of the week was the 15 minutes before faculty lunch when this room's full and everybody's talking to everybody else. And then we have a talk, we do some business or something, but the centrality of this room to the department is absolutely critical. I just got a text from Matt Cubstead, who informs me that 24 of our faculty were Pappalardo fellows or Pappalardo finalists. So that's like a third of the faculty. That tells you something about this program. We did have some fun, Neil and I, at this event some years ago. The faculty had decided to make Richard Fletcher a junior faculty offer, and I had an offer letter, and I colluded with Neil to put it on Richard's plate at the dinner tonight. And so, you know, we're all there having a good time, and suddenly this cheer goes up from one part of the room when Richard finds, you know, which he would, is Richard here? No, okay. Oh, I can tell more stories about him then. Anyway, I'll just tell one last story about an interaction with Neil on faculty governance. I was on a search committee, I think thanks to Marc, a presidential search committee 13 years ago. And we had a meeting where the search committee heard from the student search committee. And so there was, we were sitting at this U-shaped table. The students, graduate and undergraduate, were all along the other side. Corporation members were all on this side, and the faculty was kind of sitting. And the students come in, and it was really funny to see, because on the corporation side are, you know Bob Millard and Neil and Terry Reagan and Barry Ziesinger, you know, all this august phalanx of MIT leadership. And then on the other side are these students. The corporation members are all looking at the students like, oh, because, you know, they're remembering 4 decades or so earlier, and the students are just, what do we? And Rick Locke was sitting next to me. Rick's now dean of the Sloan School, and he said, there must be a mapping from there, pointing to the students, to there, pointing to the corporation members. And I was looking at this, and I thought, I wonder which one's the Neil, which one's going to be the next. And we had some reception afterwards, and I told Neil this, and Neil started looking around the room, and he points to some kid, and he goes, "That one," and this kid's like, you know, and his shoes untied, and you know, that was a very human moment. Anyway, I'm between you and dinner. I'm really sad right now because I think Neil, I would have really enjoyed spending some time with Neil talking about our favorite subject, which is writing code. He did that all his life. He's got some laptop where there must be magic in it. And, you know, I went from typing in an Emacs window to yapping into Claude this year. And I think Neil would really have enjoyed being able to program by talking, because I think that would have combined two of his favorite things. And you know, when you work with Claude, you don't even look at the screen. You just talk, and the computer does things, and buys airline tickets, and whatever you want it to do. Anyway, I'm going to remember many, many things. I could stand here all night and tell stories, but thank you for your attention, and you know, condolences again to the family. This is hard for all of us, and you in particular, but there's a lot of goodness here. So good night. Thank you.
So thanks to everyone who spoke, and that ends our program for today. So for those of you who are going to the dinner, it's the reception will be starting there when you get there, and have a good evening. Thanks.